Hello and welcome to this strategic analysis video for the November 2021 and February 2022 strategic case study exam on video game developer Pixlwizz. In this video, we're going to be looking at some of the key strategic models from the CIMA syllabus and how they apply to the case. This is the 8th video in our video series, and we have 2 more to come after this, looking at the top 10 most likely unseen issues and also the industry analysis. So before we begin, just going to give a very quick overview to the case itself. Some of you may be aware of it, some of you may not have seen the pre-scene yet. And essentially, it's about video game development. Now, this might be something that is familiar to many of you. Perhaps you have played video games, but perhaps you haven't. And even if you have played video games, you probably don't know that much about the industry itself and the logistics behind the industry. So it's a very interesting case for us to look at. An overview of the organization is that it's a large, publicly traded company based in the developed nation of Westland, where the currency is the Western dollar. So that's an overview of the case itself. Now let's take a look at an overview of this video. Now, how we're going to analyze this case throughout this strategic analysis video is to look at something known as the rational model. And essentially, that involves looking at where the organization currently is, where it wants to be, and how it's going to get there. So it's a 3-step process. And we're going to start by looking at the future, where the organization wants to go, what it's ultimately trying to achieve. And we'll do that by looking at things such as the mission statement, reviewing the mission of the organization, the purpose of the organization, also looking at its performance measurements, how it's going to measure its progress, looking at its governance as well, how the board is composed and whether it has the relevant parts of the code of governance. We'll also look at the ethics and the corporate social responsibility of the organization, what the company values and what it should be trying to achieve. Then look at what makes the company successful, the things that it does that helps maintain its competitive advantage and how it shouldn't compromise on those as part of its future strategy, before looking at the stakeholders and the stakeholders that are most relevant and most important to the organization. We'll then look at where the company currently is, looking at the greater environment in which it operates using the PESTEL analysis, before focusing more specifically on the industry in the 5 forces analysis, and then finally at the company itself in the SWOT analysis. And once we have decided where the organization wants to head or where it wants to be and where it currently is, we'll then look at how it can cross that bridge, how it can get from the now to the future. And we'll do that by looking at various strategy models such as the generic strategy, the ANSOS matrix, the methods of growth, and also the business strategy of the organization itself and strategies to put in place going forward. So quite a lot to analyze, and we'll begin by looking at the mission statements of the company and what makes a good mission statement. Now, what a mission statement ultimately is about for an organization is the overall overarching objectives of it, why it exists, what its purpose is as an organization. And this provides a common purpose that everyone involved with the organization can be aware of. So whether it's the suppliers of the organization, the customers of the organization, the staff of the organization, they all know what the organization is about, and all the different staff members within the team are helping to work towards that common purpose. And the Campbell's mission statement is a good way of appraising an organization and what it's about, and appraising its mission statement and what its mission statement should be about, what it's about trying to achieve, etc. And that's split into 4 different points that we're going to go through now. Now remember, the mission statement from the pre-scene for Pixlwizz is that Pixlwizz exists to attract the talented people who create virtual worlds that enable gamers to immerse themselves in exciting realities. Pixlwizz create exciting places to work and play. So it's very much focused on the staff and focused on the customers. Those are the main two stakeholders that have been brought out in that mission statement. So when we're talking about the purpose of the organization, why it exists, who does it exist for, based on the mission statement, it exists for the customer and it exists for staff to give them a creative outlet to create new, exciting, innovative video games. And the organization's hope in the long term is to be the best game developer. Its vision is to be the best game developer. So it wants to be the best, and it exists to provide an exciting place to work and an exciting place to play for the customer. Those are the purposes of the organization. So when you're in the exam and when you are answering questions, if there is some sort of strategy that you're analyzing, appraising, it doesn't really fit in with that at all. It's not anything to do with creating a good place to work. It's not anything to do with improving the end user experience for the customer. Then maybe it's not really in line with the mission statement. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but that would be a really useful point to bring up in your exam. The next point on the Campbell's mission statement is the strategy. How will the organization compete and the range of businesses it is operating within? Now, of course, it's in the video game market, produces a wide range of video games. The pre-scene tells us that it produces many different games for many different consoles, many different genres, etc. But it doesn't necessarily say how it's going to compete, beyond being the best game developer, beyond being exciting, being a good place to work and play. It doesn't necessarily tell us anything about whether it's going to compete on price, whether it's going to compete on quality, whether it's going to compete on value for money, etc. Then you have the values, what the organization stands for. Again, quality, value for money, innovation, etc. What we can tell from the pre-scene, the things that the organization truly values is the teamwork and commitment of staff, and that of course links back to the purpose of it being a great place for staff to work. Also about being innovative and imaginative. So new games, they need to be innovative. They need to be exciting and imaginative. And actually, interestingly enough, the company makes a huge amount of revenue, over 80% of its revenue, from its 6 main franchises. And one could argue that franchise perhaps is not necessarily innovative, is not imaginative, because you're just basically making a sequel, continual sequels to the same game. So, but you can compete in that sense by offering franchise. You can make new, innovative changes to the franchises to keep them fresh, to keep them exciting. So that would also comply there if you have these changes that you're making to the franchises that are imaginative, that are innovative, that would comply with the values. And finally, you have the principles, and these are policies put in place within the organization to make sure that staff are acting in accordance with the values, the strategy, the purpose. So it could be that all employees get given a handbook that's got the values of the company in, how you can express these values and how you should be living and breathing these values, etc. Because if staff are bought into the mission, they're bought into the purpose, the strategy, the values of the organization, they're more likely to live according to them, more likely to work according to them. And by keeping staff motivated, keeping them happy, etc., you're more likely to achieve that. But it's all part of the organization's values, whole part of the organization's approach, the organization's missions, to be a good place to work for those staff members. Now on to the balanced scorecard, and this is a very useful performance measurement tool. Of course, you can look at the mission of the company, and it wants to be the best game developer, it wants to be a great place to work, etc. These are all nice objectives, nice missions to have. But of course, you have to track your progress. You have to measure your performance there. How do you know if you're being a good place to work? How do you know if you're one of the leading game developing companies? And that's where appraising your performance, measuring your performance comes in. The balanced scorecard is a great way to do that because it splits into those 4 distinct perspectives. We're not just focusing on the finances, we're not just focusing on staff, we're not just focusing on customers, we're focusing on all of it at once. Of course, got the finance perspective, which is your more traditional accounting metrics, profit, return on investment, etc. Your internal perspective, looking more at your internal efficiencies and internal projects completed. Your learning perspective, your innovation, your growth, the number of new innovations implemented, etc. And finally, your customer perspective as well. How well your customers are viewing you, how much money you're generating from customers, how many repeat customers you have, etc. So let's take a look more closely at the balanced scorecard. Financial perspective, nice and easy. Just checking your profit. Is your profit increasing? Is your cash flow position getting better? The amount of cash and cash equivalents in the bank getting better, etc. All of these are easy metrics to measure using the finance perspective. Then you have the learning perspective. So the number of new innovations, number of new technologies the company has implemented. It's brought in new hardware that allows it to make fancier algorithms for the games, etc. New softwares that have been created that can be then licensed out or can be used and recycled across different games to save time, save money, etc. Of course, a very straightforward one here would be the number of games complete, the number of new games being released to the market, because that's ultimately what is going to drive success of this business. And also, a lot of games are just going to have to be completed. If you have already read through the financial statements of the organization, you will see there's quite a sizable sum, 723 million Western dollars on the statement of financial position in deferred revenue. And this will ultimately be composed of pre-sales for games that haven't been released. We've taken money for games that we haven't actually finished and released yet. So it's very, very important that we actually get on and finish those games in time, because people have already paid for them. And that money might have to be paid back if we do not. Then for the internal perspective, no, staff are very important. It repeatedly spoke about the importance of staff in the pre-scene. It was in the values of the company, the mission of the company. It was in the risk report of the company. In the section on the company itself, it spoke about how many people were needed and how many people were crucial to game development. So making sure that they are used effectively, you're getting the best out of them and keeping them busy, because if they feel like they're not being kept busy, they feel they're not being tested and challenged in their daily lives, then perhaps they are not going to want to stay for a longer period of time, because they might feel that it's a boring place to work. And of course, we want them to feel it's a good place to work. Also, retaining staff. Staff turnover is a classic metric of measuring staff satisfaction. If people are staying with the company and keep committing to the company, on side note, as part of the values, then that is very important. Job success rates as well, how many games are completed on time, how many games are completed to budget. And another one that I've got here that was directly from the pre-scene is the KLOC. Now you remember that term from the articles at the back of the pre-scene. This is all about errors per 1,000 lines of delivered code. So the more errors that we have per delivered code, the more quality control it needs to go through, the more time needs to be spent fixing it, etc. So a good way of appraising internal performance could be to reduce that KLOC. Finally, the customer perspective. So looking at the number of users, this could be the daily average users, the monthly average users, and the revenue that we generate from them, but also how satisfied they are with us as a gaming company. Do they feel that we're trying to milk revenue from them through too many loot boxes, etc.? Or are we not creating enough new and exciting, innovative games? We're just constantly making new releases to the same franchises, etc. And also making a note of the K factor of our different games as well. This was another thing that was mentioned a few times in the pre-scene, which ultimately is about how viral a game is. And if you have a game that when one person plays it, they recommend it to 100 people, and only one of those 100 people purchases it, then it doesn't have a very high K factor. If 50% of those people purchase it, then it has a very high K factor. And having games with those good factors is very useful from a marketing and growth and development perspective, because it means that the game is going to become more and more popular through word of mouth. When one person buys it, one person talks about it, the more people in their circle are going to purchase it as well. And this is very common amongst games like Call of Duty, games like FIFA, etc., where people play online a lot and where people are going to need the latest copy to play online. You might be able to play the old edition of FIFA, and it might be just the same in terms of the career modes and things like that. But if all your friends are playing the latest FIFA and there isn't a cross-play online between the latest FIFA and the old FIFA, then you're going to just have to get the new FIFA in order to play with your friends. So that would be an example of a game with a very high K factor. Now on to the governance, and governance is a very important P3 topic, and ultimately it's all about running an organization in a way that benefits all of the stakeholders in the best way as possible. Of course, you can't always do that, but it's good to try. And good to look at what good governance includes, and this is based off the UK Code of Governance, which is what is used in the CIMA syllabus. And just a quick review of some of the key points of that, just having a separate chairperson and CEO to avoid there being too much power held by one person, having independent non-executive directors to challenge the decisions of the executive directors and people who are not paid directly by the companies, so they perhaps are looking at it more objectively and looking at it more independently. Having the audit, nomination, remuneration committees in place, and having these staffed by the independent non-executive directors to ensure that risks are being managed, controls are being effectively reviewed, the right people are being appointed to the board, and the remuneration for those people on the board is fair. Because, of course, you have to disclose that. You have to disclose that the directors' pay. You have to disclose the money that they are getting and why they are getting it. And if they're getting huge bonuses when the company's not actually done very well and certain staff members have been laid off, etc., that can cause a public relation issue. It's also important that they have all the information they need for good decision making, and that the directors themselves, all of them, are involved in the decision making. The independent non-executives are not being pushed out of the room when the meetings are taking place, when decisions are getting made, etc. And you also need to have regular meetings with your big, powerful institutional shareholders, pension funds, etc. And make sure that you're meeting all your shareholders in your annual general meeting. Shareholders, of course, being very, very important. So how does this relate to the company itself, relate to Pixlwizz and Westland? Well, there was no mention of a code of governance. Often in the pre-CIMA, when there is a code of governance, they'll call it the Eastland or the Northland or the Southland Code of Governance, and essentially the rules of it will be the same as the UK Code of Governance. But there was no mention of the Western Code of Governance. That doesn't mean they do not have one, it just means we haven't been told of it yet. But it's important that we do consider it anyway, because regardless of whether there's one or not, as it's ultimately the way in which organizations should be effectively run, it is useful to apply anyway, particularly given at this company where there is potential for the agency problem. The agency problem being where you have organizations that are being run by directors but owned by shareholders, and you have to consider whether or not the directors are running it in the best interests of the directors to get their bonuses, etc., or for the owners who perhaps want that more long-term sustainability. So there is the potential for the agency problem to arise here, which is why governance is important. And we don't know if it's a requirement in Westland at this point. Suggestions could be to bring additional non-executive directors. They do have a decent number of non-executive directors. They have the chairperson, which is a different person from the CEO, which is a good thing. But having some more could bring a bit wider range of experience to the board. Ultimately, a lot of people have been working in media. They have been working in the video game background. If we look at the various different independent non-executive directors, we have one that was working for an electronics company, another that was working for a smartphone manufacturer, and another that was working for a television company. Again, all very much in this sort of entertainment area, whereas perhaps having someone who is from medical or is from finance or something like that could help bring more experience to the board to help them review and check those decisions more effectively. There's also no mention about how things were audited. It was mentioned there was an audit committee, but there was no internal audit charter. It didn't give any information about the scope and the size and the power of the internal audit department and their roles and responsibilities, or any mention of the relationship between the external auditor, which is, of course, a very important part of that. But on that note, they do have all the committees. They have the risk committee, the audit committee, the remuneration nomination committee. A couple of issues with them, though, is that perhaps, and this is another reason why they could potentially bring on some more non-executive directors, the chair is sitting on all the committees, and that is not ideal, but it is acceptable provided they do not chair those committees. But if they did bring on some more non-executive directors, they would be able to have those committees completely staffed with people who were not the chairperson. Also, there was no talk of meetings, no talk of information about how the particular company's information is filtered up to the directors. No mention about their decision-making process, no mention about their meetings with shareholders or annual general meetings, etc., which would be a problem if they do not have it. So there are a few governance issues here. Also, another issue is there is no talk of a succession plan for particular directors when they're going to be leaving. What kind of issues is that going to have? If a director leaves suddenly, it can cause an impact on the share price. Having a succession plan in place means you've got someone ready to step into that role. There's also no talk about the length of time that certain people have served. For example, Ilana has only been the chief executive officer for a few years, but they were actually the chief operating officer, which is a board position before that, for several years. And as a result, they have now been on the board of directors for about 8 years. And governance also suggests that when someone's been on for around 9 years, you do think about replacing them, not because they're not doing a good job, but just because they may have got too set in their ways and you need a fresher approach. You need someone from a different background, someone with new ideas to come in and take over. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and more importantly, you have found it useful. Just going to take a moment to tell you about the courses that we produce here at Astranti for our case studies. And all of the products that you see here are available as standard as part of the course, but they are also available for purchase individually. We have the Exam Technique series, which is a study text and a video series which looks at how to plan your answers, how to read the material and analyze the material effectively, and to manage your time effectively in the exam, which is incredibly important. Most people who fail the case study exam fail it because of poor exam technique. So that's a really important video series for you to watch to ensure that you've got that technique. Because there is a specific technique to sitting the case study exam, and all will be revealed in that video series. And do head over to the website for more information about it. We then have our theory revision series, which again is a study text and a video series, and that looks at the specific theories that are relevant to the case study, because a lot of the material from the E's, the P's, the F's won't appear in the case study. It's only specific topics that are frequently tested in the case study. So to save you from revising all the E's and all the F's and all the P's, we've created a more condensed revision series to refresh yourself of the knowledge that you'll need for the exam. We then have our pre-scene analysis series, which looks through the pre-scene page by page, bringing out the important points. In addition to that video series, there is also a video that looks at the top 10 most likely unseen issues, and also the strategic analysis video, which takes all the key models from the CIMA syllabus and applies them to the case. We then have our industry analysis pack, which is a large document that looks at the industry that the pre-scene is based on, looks at all the real companies that are actually operating in that actual industry in the real world, looks at how they market, what the suppliers are, what the key stakeholders are, how they operate, industry trends, and also a series of industry examples that you can use and reference in your exam. And we've got sample paragraphs to show you how you would use it in the exam, and that's a document. There's also an accompanying video with it. We have our mock exams, which are based on actual exams, but they feature the reference to the actual case. So they're on the actual case that you will sit the exam on. And we've done our best to make them as close to the actual exams as possible. And you can actually sit those online in an online system that replicates the one that you'll use on the exam day. So you can really test yourself under exam conditions, and we provide marking and feedback for those mocks as well, where you'll get a tutor that will analyze your script and will give you a comprehensive document providing you with information not only on your actual script, as in whether you passed and failed and what you should have brought up and what you shouldn't have brought up, etc. But we'll also give you an appraisal on your technique as well, how to improve your exam technique. We then have our question packs, which is a series of shorter mock style questions based around the core activities. So if you find that you really struggle with certain parts of the CIMA syllabus, that will be a really good way for helping you. For example, if it's the core activity A's that you're always struggling with, or the B's that you're struggling with, you can look at the specific core activity A pack, which will give you questions based on those subjects. And then we have our masterclasses. We have 2 live all-day masterclasses, one at the start of the course and one at the end of the course. The one at the start of the course will give you all sorts of hints and tips on how to plan, how to use your time effectively. We'll also go through the planning process live, which will be really helpful for you as you progress into your mock exams. And then we have the revision masterclass right at the end, which looks at everything you've covered, gives you a refresher on everything you've covered over the 6-week period. And that's going to be really useful for giving you those little extra hints and tips to get you the extra marks in the exam. So do head over to the website, www.astranti.com, for more information about those. And I hope to see you again for the next video.